Our speaker tonight is Frank Sartor. Frank started his professional life as a chemical engineer. So, under the rules of state of origin, we claim him as one of us. He served as the Lord Mayor of Sydney for 12 years, and 8 years as a member of New South Wales Parliament and as a Minister of the New South Wales Government. And importantly, in the context of tonight, Frank is a well-respected, inquiring thinker and an inspirational speaker of the Sydney community. Our conversationalist tonight is Andrew Botros. Andrew is the Director of Expressive Engineering and is also conducting research at the Australian National University Crawford School of Public Policy. Andrew is the 2006 Engineers Australia Young Engineer of the Year, awarded for his contributions to cochlear implants, music acoustics, machine intelligence, and the engineering community. Ladies and gentlemen, for the 2012 Harrick's Address, please make very welcome to the stage Frank Sartor and Andrew Botros.
You're all connected?
I'm fine. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got the handheld mic, so I have to juggle everything today. That's okay.
I offered this one, but he didn't want it.
That's okay. Guess Savannah get all the perks. So this is a bit of a homecoming for you. You're getting back to your engineering roots, coming back to your old workplace. Do you miss the place?
No.
No.
Last time I was in this room, it was, I think, March 2011. I was debating the Liberal Party and the Greens over the environment. And everybody in this room, and it was full, were all Greens. So I'm sorry, but the room brings back bad memories. When you try and explain to Greens that, well, gas is an important fuel, it may be a transition fuel, and they all guffaw, you think, well, can't really reason with that, but anyway.
That's okay. You don't need to do that anymore.
No.
Your recent book, published 2011 by Melbourne University Press, The Fog on the Hill, How New South Wales Labor Lost Its Way. We won't be talking about the Labor Party tonight. That's been covered in interviews elsewhere because people always seem to be fascinated about that. Well, tonight we'll be focusing more on the intellectual side of the book because it reads a bit like a biography at times as well. So we'll get to focus on that this time. Start from the beginning. There's practically nothing about engineering. That's okay. It doesn't figure prominently in your professional life as such. But I thought I'd start with a quote from the book that touches on this. In my first post-university job as a plant supervisor at Colgate-Palmolive, I worked in an impossible industrial climate. It was toxic to the core. I felt that the local unions had become drunk on power, with petty power plays being almost the order of the day. Eventually I got out of the place. It was a wise decision. I then went to work for the local arm of Total, a French-owned local oil company, a move that for me represented a shift from the factory floor to head office. When you say toxic to the core, I'm assuming you mean the industrial climate and not whatever Colgate was making at the time.
Well,
or are you referring to this sort of safety?
Well, actually, there's a funny little story about that, but it was really the industrial climate. It was terrible. There were so many unions. It was before the merger of the unions in the 90s. There were lots of unions, and I remember once there was a problem with a water leak on the roof, falling on a conveyor belt, and it was causing the packets of detergent to not the cartons to be, the belt was slipping, and so the whole system was stopped, and there was a massive dispute between the electrical union and the AWU and about 3 unions were involved, and who should be able to do what first in order to get the thing fixed so that we could get the cartons to flow again. So that day we didn't put many lemons into packets of fat, no. There was one little incident I remember when I was in charge of the base plant, where we ended up, one of the staff alerted me to the fact that we had quite a bit of foam in the local creek. And I thought, that was the day before the EPA, and I thought, oh my God. And the trouble with detergent is that it foams up and you can't actually hide it, you know, like it was right there. And it's not particularly dangerous, but it was a little bit embarrassing that day. So we had to shut the base plant down and sort out. Unfortunately, detergent takes some days to clear. Foam takes some time to clear. So there you go. That was a needed experience. I wasn't environment minister then, a long time before that.
Was that experience at Colgate what turned you off engineering? If anything, you didn't stay for long in engineering.
Well, in part. Look, I did chemical engineering, but I wasn't perhaps the most conscientious student at that, because I think I was a bit, I'd grown up in a country environment and I came to Sydney and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I was sort of attracted to engineering because I was always practical of mind. I liked to get things done and so on. But you didn't do much chemical engineering usually in Australia, in US-owned subsidiaries. Australian companies are owned by the US. And you know, you're doing plant supervision, and a lot of it was just dealing with industrial problems and, you know, the leaks in the roof and all that rubbish that you get the factory operating. And it wasn't very rewarding, and it was very stressful. And so, and there was this quite a terrible, you know, disagreement between the management and the unions, and lots of strikes, and you just got sick of it. There was too much conflict around. It was actually good training for coming into Parliament, because you got quite used to the conflict, you know.
And lots of foam in the creeks with politics.
Lots of foam in the creeks, so you got used to foaming, you know, foaming frenzies and all those things. So it was good training, really.
So your next job was at Total, an oil company. Was it just by chance that that was more a management capacity, that it was a chance to get out of the job that you didn't like?
Yeah, I originally went there as a supply analyst and basically sort of took a junior manager position. And what I did there was I was involved in negotiating the, you know, imports of petroleum and crude oil, and also making the pricing submissions to what was then the Price Justification Tribunal, which became the Petroleum Products Pricing Authority, which then became subsumed by the ACCC eventually. So I was involved in oil industry economics, basically. It was very different. You were at head office. It was a small company, it eventually got sold to Ampol, but it was very different working at a head office compared to working, you know, in the sort of factory floor with pretty militant. You know, this was the late 70s. It was a pretty militant time.
And I assume the logic went like this: oil company, chemical engineer, and it was the bridge into something of a more economics nature.
That's right.
And so more by chance that you moved into the economics and the commercial side of the business, rather than that's exactly what I wanted to do.
Well, I mean, being a chemical engineer, you did at least have some idea what a benzene ring looked like.
Yeah.
And you sort of
You hired.
You kind of knew the jargon. Often it's knowing the jargon. I mean, as George Bernard Shaw once said, what did he say? The professions are a conspiracy against the laity, and the ways the profession conspire against the laity is they introduce a whole barrier around their profession, jargon, terminology. Doctors do it to perfection.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you can understand what they're saying, they then make sure they scribble it so you can't read their writing.
Yeah, and then they reinvent names for bits of anatomy instead of shoulder blade, it's a scapula.
That's right, and the lawyers do it pretty well too. Yes.
And I always tell people lawyers have figured it right out, because you have to call them your honour and things like that. They even invent their own terminology.
Now, engineers never do, except for the RTA's engineers. They invent all sorts of rules.
Very good. You went into the commerce degree, finishing in, I believe, in 1983.
Yep.
Was that, again, to support that position that you thought?
I felt I wanted to get out of engineering and
so
I did a part-time commerce degree and majoring in accounting and other things.
So right up front, engineering was a fairly brief experience, but what do you think you got out of it fundamentally that has held perhaps for the rest of your career?
I got to mix a lot of test tubes and do a lot of things in the laboratory, but look, engineering, and I think it's the same with all the engineering disciplines, but it does teach you to apply sanity, to apply real-world checks to everything you do. And you know, sanity checks are so important. And knowing chemical engineering, lecturers always used to say, this is what we've got, this is the process, these are the, you know, the feedstocks, this is the equation, how much do you think will come out? And you've always got to be able to, what do you think the, you know, the outcome, or whatever the question was, might be a heat balance, might be a mass balance, and you should always try and get an idea in the back of your mind, the back of an envelope, what do you think the answer is? And then you set about setting up the proper equations and the modelling to work it out. If the two disagree with each other, then you've got to work out why. Because often the back of the envelope calculation is actually better than the other one. And when they disagree, you've got to work out why. If you can find out why, there might be a good reason that your back of the envelope calculation got it wrong. Now, that lesson, I'll just give a little example in politics actually. When I was mayor, the state government were proposing to build the Eastern Distributor, and I wanted them to underground it all the way into the main tunnel. And so I got the staff to commission one of the reputable engineering firms to work out what extra it would cost. And the answer came back that it was like 40 million. Now, I failed what I'd learned in engineering that particular time. Often I didn't. Often I used to ask the dumb questions and say, well, that doesn't make sense. Why would that be this when this is that? And then the staff has to go away and think about it. This particular occasion, for whatever reason, I took the advice that was 40 million. If I had done a little bit of a calculation and said, well, the existing tunnel, the estimate, I think the estimate was 400 million at the time, but I think the 1.4 kilometre tunnel component of it, I think it's 1.4, 1.6 kilometre tunnel, was about, I think, 200 million, or thereabouts. And this tunnel to underground the Woolloomooloo portion would have been, I think, another kilometre. So if you just did the calculation, you'd probably come up with the fact that it might be about 140 million, just by sheer proportion, no great science. Of course, they came up with 40 and I bought the damn thing, and then of course went out there publicly arguing for it and got shot down in flames by the RTA, so no, it's 140 million. And when you thought about it, they were right. And the advice I was getting was wrong. I was not happy at that time, because I thought, well, particularly with myself, because if I had just done a little bit of a back of the envelope calculation, I would have said, are you sure 40 million's right? And they said, oh, we just talked about the tunnelling component. I thought, thanks a lot, you know. Thanks a lot, that made me look like a fool. And I lost the argument. I mean, Edmund Capon, who was much more cultured than me, he managed to get a little cover over it near the art gallery, because he had the ear of Bob, Bob Carr, the Premier. But I failed in my part of the argument because I got the numbers wrong.
Yeah.
Because I took advice without testing it in my own brain.
And just perhaps a question for me. Did you have engineers as advisors personally, by any chance? So no one else was...
We had a city projects, but they commissioned, it wasn't Worley Parsons, it wasn't even St. Peter, it was another, I forget, yeah, another firm. And I think they asked the wrong questions. And
okay, and they didn't get the scope of the...
They didn't get the scope right, and came back and I went out publicly, all guns blazing, and had to retreat. Yeah.
So there wasn't like an army of engineers doing equations on the back of envelopes in your office?
No. We would do a proper firm, but I think they asked the wrong questions.
Fair enough.
Either that or the firm got the most junior person in the office to do the work. Not sure which, never found out.
Okay, so let's talk about your time at council, which most people know you for. You were elected to council in 1984, but most people know you as Mayor of the City of Sydney, and you're the longest serving Mayor from 1991 to 2003. A small quote from your farewell speech in this place as an MP later on, which I thought was kind of cute to summarise your time as Mayor. While Mayor, we transformed the city's administration from an overstaffed, underachieving municipal fiefdom to an efficient and motivated team. How would you characterise your time as Mayor and your approach as Mayor generally, if you had to reflect on that?
Well, look, when I first became Mayor, I was actually I was living in fear, because I was worried. The city was a bit of a basket case. I was overstaffed, a terrible staff culture. I didn't have a lot of experience, and I was actually quite fearful. I remember the first night being in the office, the big office with nothing, no papers, and just thinking, my God, I hope I don't stuff this up. And it got worse. Within about a year, I remember the town clerk at the time, who was a bit of an operator. I remember once there was some, it started to emerge within a year that there were financial problems. And I remember once saying to the town clerk, look, I'm going to meet with the media and I'm just going to tell them the truth. Oh, man, that's a novel approach. It was like a scene out of his minister, you know. And then he left, thank God, and gradually replaced the executive and replaced others. But it was very difficult. And I was very motivated and I worked very hard, but it was very difficult. I was quite inexperienced. And I also was being elected by the council in those days, so 4 years, each year I had to be elected by the council, so I had to spend 3 months having cups of tea with every councillor and doing all the stuff you do. And then a car changed the act to make it a popular vote for me. So when I got re-elected in 95, I had 4 years, and then again 4 years in 99, which is a better system. So it was very difficult. The city was a basket case, so we had to transform it financially, structurally, culturally, so that we came out the other end. In the end, we halved the staff, we outsourced quite a few things, and we did it on the basis of what made sense, practical, pragmatic, what makes sense, rather than ideology. You know, using sort of like a public interest test of some sort, you know, the public benefit test. Are we better off doing this or doing that? And one example, for example, was there used to be a childcare centre in Hyde Park. If you remember it, the Hyde Park Childcare Centre near the corner of Elizabeth and Park Street, and the parents would come to my office and come to me complaining they didn't like the director and the staff. There was some problem. When you're the mayor, sort of 15 times removed, you don't really know who's telling you what or how right it is, or you know, you can only sort of surmise. And it's not as if they came to me with compelling evidence. They just come in with more nature of gripes. There were quite a few gripes. And I met with staff and I tried to sort of get them to resolve it, but there was so many links in the chain of command that, you know, anything you said got diluted and never happened. And we got to a point after 3 or 4 months that I just rang up the head of the kindergarten and I said, look, can you take over this centre for us? You're in the business of kindergartens and childcare centres. We're not. We're simply, you know, out there in the private sector, there are pockets of expertise that not all public sector organisations have. We just don't have it. So can you do it? And Antoinette Lamarchon, who was in charge, I think it was it kindergarten union or was it family day? It was one of them anyway. They said, yeah, we'll do it. So went through the formal process, we gave it to them, and of course, within weeks, everything calmed down, everyone was happy. You know, I used to have, you know, dentists and people coming to me about the rent on their commercial leases. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Everyone wants a lower rent. I'm the mayor, I don't want to be dealing with rent negotiations on all the commercial properties the council owns. So I rang up Max Rain and Horn. I said, Max, I want to outsource this. So we went to the tender process. And, I think it was Rain and Horn PDF, or called now, whoever actually won the tender, and never had another problem. So you just you just go to where there's expertise, where people can do things better than you can. And sometimes it's worth even paying a premium. Usually you save money, but sometimes you pay a premium because they make a profit margin. And so we just got rid of a lot of problems. I remember once the St Peter's tip kept smelling and Alan Jones kept ranting about the smells. And Catherine Griner would go down the middle of the pit and talk about the smells on live on Alan Jones. And you go, oh my God. And there'd been a corruption inquiry and they'd found corruption. And then there were rumours there might be more corruption, and I used to send in the auditors and they found nothing. So in the end I said, well no, we should just sell it. So I went to the council and said, I want to sell the tip. And they said, oh, but this could be world's best practice, we might do whatever. And I just said, hands up those that have been out the tip the last 4 years. And of course only Catherine Griner's hands were up. And I said, apart from you, Catherine. I said, you're not going to make this the world's best practice because it's not your core business, you're not into it. You don't really understand, you know how to do it. So we ended up selling the site, made $30 million and got rid of the problem. So it's just, you know, getting rid of
non-core business.
Non-core, doing things practically, not for ideological reasons. None of it was because I believed in privatisation or because I believed in day labour. It's because we just weren't doing it well enough.
That fundamental change in approach must have been quite difficult, but that was the mood of the country's change at the same time. But what else helped? Because we were chatting and said, well, that period happened to coincide with the Olympics, so if there was anything really difficult, well, the Olympics needs it, and everyone just kind of shut up and moved on. What other factors do you think helped in that transition for Sydney generally?
Well, there are four. In my book, I talk about the four elements of good government, which is very simply woven theory or philosophy I have. The four elements of good government are firstly that you've got to have good policy, you've got to have sound policy. You've got to start from a policy perspective. Secondly, you've got to then have manageable politics, because not all good policy can be implemented, because if there are too many losers or too many very strong losers, you can't implement some of it. So there's often compromises, but if you start from good policy and you say, well, what are the politics like, you might end up doing half of what you planned or not quite as much or compromising. If you start from the politics, you'll often lose your way because you're trying to put clothing on something that's quite naked, because politics is really just a process technique. It's whether you can get something done or not, whether it's good policy is about an outcome. So good policy, manageable politics, sound implementation, and then the fourth element is what I call transparency, particularly when there are losers in what you do. There are some winners and some losers. And this is where the Olympics and other things helped. Two things helped me get major difficult decisions made when I was mayor. The first thing was the city was broke and the Daily Telegraph kept running cartoons with a plug hole in the side of the town hall above it and it's gone down the sink, all sorts of graphic illustrations of how bad things were. And the bad press was actually an advantage because it meant that the unions within the council accepted that change was going to have to happen. The state was threatening to sack us and all that, there's another story as well, but basically I was able to halve the staff, outsource a lot of things and make a lot of reforms on the basis that it was manifestly obvious that the city was in a mess. So I used that to my advantage to make the changes I needed. Second thing that happened, once I got us out of that trouble, which took to about 94, 95, we turned our mind on getting the city ready for the Olympics. And then things like ripping up the city's footpaths to improve them and all the sort of street furniture, all the things, that upset a lot of people. The shopkeepers lost income and so on. But they could accept it. The community at large, deep down, accepted it because I was preparing the city for the Olympics. There was an obvious, transparent reason why I was doing it. One of the problems with public policy, if you're doing something that's going to negatively impact on some people and people don't believe there's a good reason for it or have doubts about it, you've got a problem. Because they say, well, look, I won't cop the pain. I mean, during wartime, people accept all sorts of sacrifices because they can see a compelling reason. If there isn't a compelling reason, one of the reasons why the climate change and the carbon tax issue has gone off the rails is because, there's lots of reasons, but it's been debated for far too long, it's dragged on, and the sceptics in society and everyone's starting to question it, and in the psyche of people, if something doesn't get resolved soon, people start thinking, well, there must be a problem with it because it's not resolved. Because people don't actually spend a lot of time thinking about it. Most people don't, some people do. And so then they start developing doubts about the science or doubts about aspects of it. So when you come to introduce a trading scheme or a carbon tax, which sounds a lot worse, people are not sure that it's going to make a difference or there's a compelling reason. So they say, well, why should we do something when we only emit 0.5% of total emissions, and even if we cut that by whatever percent, it's only going to 0.00% of nothing. So people don't see the point, so they can't, the reason for them is not compelling, which is why a majority of people are against it. There are other people that take the view that there's an advantage in us being ahead of the curve, and there's also a big moral reason for us to do something, but that's never as compelling to people as something that's immediate. So in my case, the city was broke, something had to be done, and B, the Olympics are coming and we want to be in good shape. And people could see the reason, so they would cop the medicine, so to speak. It's a bit like your child, look, you've got to have this medicine because you want to get better, and he's coughing and spluttering, grudgingly he or she might have it.
Yeah, it's almost like a universal rule, never waste a good crisis.
That's right,
exactly right. Public life.
Exactly right.
And following on from that, are we too complacent as perhaps a city or a country to doing too well as such to make change which may be looming on the horizon, but well, it's just too hard and there are too many competing interests to really galvanise a single direction.
I think you're onto something. I mean, we had the Keating's recession we had to have in 89, 90. There was you remember the October crash in 89, I think it was? And then remember we had the 24 holes in the ground and the things that... But at that time, I think there was a recognition, because we also had, I think, the recession of 82, 83, that got, when Howard was treasurer, Fraser lost, and then cried. You remember all these things, don't we? I think that there was probably more of an understanding in the 80s that we had to reform. So there was union reform, there was the floating of the exchange rate, there was other financial reform. But I think, in the 90s and into the noughties, probably there hasn't been the compelling reason for change. And ironically, Rudd's spending for the GFC, I mean, we're all, for the benefit of hindsight, think, well, maybe you didn't need to spend quite as much or whatever, but because we never really felt any pain, I still think that hasn't necessarily... What the government did was very clever, and it was, whether they went too far, it matters a degree, but basically they did the right thing. But they never got any credit for that, because people weren't in a position where they were desperate for the government to fix it, and a lot of them didn't feel it.
I mean, the central argument that the people, whether true or not, the people got saved from a disaster. Well, if people don't experience the disaster, they don't have a lot to relate to directly.
That's right,
yeah.
That's right.
So coming back to your council days, how detailed were you in the everyday aspects of council? And I might lead off with a quote that for me almost sounds like an engineer speaking, but I'm twisting this, but we'll see how the audience thinks about it. All bureaucracies need to be held accountable. They need to have people in charge who carefully observe their performance. Too often I would have to raise with senior bureaucrats, and raise again and again, issues about the cleanliness of the city, the state of footpaths, the work of our city rangers, and so on. By this time I lived in Pitt Street, within 2 blocks of Sydney Town Hall, and so whenever the bureaucrats told me porkies about how things were running in the city, I was able to correct them very quickly. They came to know that I expected a very high standard. I almost imagine like a test engineer who's observing the city cranking along each day, and when you step into the office, you've got first-hand experience of how things are actually going. Was that important to be close to detail?
Yes. I also introduced random audits of the cleanliness of the city as well, and I introduced, and I also used to do, I introduced the street cameras in about 95, 96, because we were getting crime down in the southern end of the CBD in George Street, that was around the pubs. And so we did a lot of things. We didn't just do one thing, and we didn't run around with hot air. We basically said, look, we've got to fix up the lighting, upgrade the footpaths, put in closed circuit TV, do a bunch of whole of probably a dozen things. And but then when we put in the street cameras, I became concerned this 24/7 that they'd be asleep during the night, not watching. So sometimes at 1 o'clock in the morning, I'd knock on their door. Hey, how's it going? What's happening tonight? Anything? Oh, okay, bye. And I just wanted them to know that I cared. And so if I said the street sweeping, the street's not clean, and the bureaucrats give me a report, which usually covered over most of it, and I said it again next week, after about 2 or 3 weeks, I'll say, okay, well, every Monday morning we're having a meeting about street cleaning. And the first 2 or 3 months I think, oh, he'll get sick of this, he'll get bored with this. But I knew that if I did it for about 4 to 6 times in a row, that they would realise that this was important, therefore they would do it. And that's one of the great problems of government, with the span of control being so big, governments being so big, having so many services. Ministers don't really keep an eye on that stuff at all. And when the people delivering the service don't think the people at the top care, they form their own rules. They don't always do bad, but they do their own rules. And that's why I think that's so important. And in the lead up to the Olympics, they knew that I would see it and I would watch. And if there were skateboarders ruining the streets on the weekend, I'd ring up. And I was a pain in the whatever, but it worked because I did it consistently over time. That's the boring, hard, and essential part of good management, whether it be private sector or public sector. just making sure that the covenant to deliver something is actually lived up to. It's actually doing what you say you'll do, and doing it well. Because everyone is subjective, you know. I mean, I'm held accountable, but everyone's subjective. Everyone does their job, starts to believe that they do it better than they really do. Everyone's subjective. Even you in the audience are not perfect. I think you look pretty perfect to me, but I suspect on the margin you've got a slight little bit to improve if possible. Well, I know I'm not perfect, and people tell me that all the time.
Let's step a bit further back. You mentioned earlier 4 elements of good government, and you talk about these in your book. Do you see that in governments today? Do you see parts of it, or is it not coming together? What's your feeling on those 4 elements and what you see in all levels of government as currently run?
I'm unfortunately a bit pessimistic about government at the moment. Maybe it's a phase. And
hence the book, obviously.
Sometimes, well, that was particular. A lot of things went wrong with the New South Wales Labor Party, but I think it's more bigger than that. I'm more pessimistic. I think we've got, in both sides of politics, we've got a pretty narrow base of the gene pool of people going into politics. You know, either ex-trade unionists or party operatives or ministerial staffers on the Liberal Party side, failed businessmen, second-rate lawyers, and a couple of party operatives there as well, probably. I don't see sort of a broad base of representing community talent in the parliaments. There's some gems there, but not many. Very few gems. And so when you look at and also it's driven. It has been driven for a couple of decades now by the people that think it's all about tactical politics, all about politics. Mate, it's all about politics. So you get a phone call, oh, we need a policy by tomorrow on X. Oh, Jesus, you know, well, whatever. Policies made in 24 hours often don't last very long, or they're not very good, you know. If you're clever, you'll have a whole suite of ideas and policies you've been working on, so that when they do ring, they want one, you dust one out, a bit like the RTA, you know. They have this road and bridge no one bloody wants, and they have it in the drawer. And when a new minister comes in that's totally naive and stupid, they dust it out, and before you know it, it's signed off and it's being built, you know. Anyone here from the RTA? I think I know some of you.
I've got a question for you later about the union.
We'll get to questions.
We'll come to variables, the speed, the traffic and parking rules.
Well,
and penalties in a minute. I'm so cross about those.
Let's get closer to
If I win a lottery, I'll start a new political party called the Public Interest Party, and the first policy will be to change to rationalise all the speeding limits and halve all parking fines, and to only to give people demerit points if it's genuinely an offence that is dangerous to the public. We've got 3 times the number of offences that attract demerit points in New South Wales and other states. So you guys are in my bad books.
Let's get closer to state politics. Questions later.
So sorry, to get back to, I got off the track, but you know, the pink bats, we want to spend the money, we want to do X, Y, Z. Now I know they were trying to spend money in a hurry, but you know, when you say, I'll just give, the supplier gets paid the money and they'll find the client without any accountability. There was no accountability. They didn't think that through at all. So the quality of policy making both in public service and at political level is not very good. And in New South Wales, the solar bonus scheme, the Greens wanted something, so our lot decided they were going to do it more. 60 cents a kilowatt hour, ran up a bill of about $2 billion. Just ridiculous. You know, you've got to think through the policies, you've got to think through the consequences, and then make sure that you set up the implementation apparatus and make sure it works.
Okay, moving on to state politics, close to some of the issues that we're talking about. You were elected as member for Rockdale in 2003, and then you served as minister for, and quite a lengthy list, but I thought it would be useful to go through energy and utilities, science and medical research, minister assisting the Minister for Health, Cancer, Minister for Planning, Minister for Redfern and Waterloo, Minister for the Arts, and Minister for Climate Change and the Environment. It's quite a long list. How did, say, the first one come about? So Bob Carr appointed you as Minister for, say, Energy and Utilities. why that came about? It was
Because he didn't want me to be Minister for Local Government, he didn't want me to be Minister for Planning.
So it was more just a case of what was left?
And when Carl made me Minister for Planning, he rang him up and abused him and said, why did you make him Minister for Planning for? No, the reason why I was Minister for Cancer was because I had set up the Sydney Cancer Foundation and had then worked with Craig Knowles and Professor Bishop to look at a state cancer plan, State Cancer Institute, and I had quite a passion for that, and they decided to make me Minister responsible for cancer, and we did set up the State Cancer Institute, and it's been a huge success. Our survival rates in New South Wales are higher than other states. Our smoking rates are lower than other states. And yeah, smoking kills 6,000 people a year in New South Wales. 6,000, it's estimated. So if you cut smoking from 18% to 15%, you work it out. If you cut it by 10%, what's 10% of 6,000 in the long run? I mean, you can't be precise, but in the long run, 10% of 6,000, 600 lives a year. So when I think about what I've done in politics, setting up the Cancer Institute, getting it bipartisan support, making it work, is to me my biggest achievement.
You said so in your farewell speech, the creation of the Cancer Institute has been the proudest achievement in public life. You obviously still think that's the case.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, because we've done, we've changed breast screening, it was a mess. We cut smoking rates. We've got what they're now doing, for example, is they've developed this clinical services register where they're now mapping how doctors treat cancer patients, and they're developing a database, and it's not being done in a public way to shame doctors, but basically they're influencing the methodology and the protocols that doctors are using in treating people so that we get best. So the biggest gain in cancer cure will be applying best practice to everybody, by far. And the breakthroughs will come, but just lifting the bar on best practice, on actual practice to best practice, would save, I think the survival rates now in cancer are about 66%. If you went to best practice, you'd probably get to 75%. That's a lot of lives, considering you're losing 13,000 people from cancer in New South Wales every year. 35,000, I think, get cancer in New South Wales every year. So it just makes a big change.
And do you have reflections on the role of technology in relation to that as well?
Oh,
reflecting on it, is it proportionally similar effects? Or?
Well, it is. Yes, it is obviously helping. I mean, targeting, for example, radiotherapy. So it's the simulate. When you do radiotherapy, firstly you go through a simulator and you get simulated. You work out how to do it and the coordinates, and then of course you go through your twice a week or 3 times a week to have your dose. But just the accuracy of targeting radiotherapy, the quality of the drugs, and how you target your chemo, and how you limit side effects. The sort of surgical procedures now with it's been around for some years, but with brachytherapy and all the things they do for various types of cancers has made a big difference too. So that is actually helping. But I actually think that medical research needs an influx of good engineers. We've got some good scientists there, but I think it's an area which is really about just refining and improving what we're doing. And there will be the breakthroughs like Gleevec for, I think it's chronic myeloid leukemia, which is almost a silver bullet. It wipes out nearly all of it. I think it might be chronic myeloid leukemia. I might have got the wrong species, so if I'm wrong about that, don't go around quoting it. But there is one cancer where there's this drug Gleevec that actually works really well. But there's 200, 300 species of cancer. So
let's go to middle to end 2009, and at that period, you had a reasonable feeling that you may become Premier. And for the benefit of the audience, if you don't know, you lost a factional election by 2 votes to Christina Keneally, who then went on to become Premier. In your book, you say, at that period, I worked on new ideas, initiatives and policies and had a drawer full of them. How about, just summarise perhaps some of those plans at that period of time that you thought were the most urgent for New South Wales?
Well, look, the biggest problem in New South Wales is transport. It's the biggest problem nationally, and it is singularly depresses me at times that national governments who have the more discretionary money than state governments don't realise that there needs to be a federal-state agreement on providing a lot more investment in transport. Sydney, I think, is behind in transport investment of probably $100 billion. It's not just Labor governments. It goes back 60 years. The rail network is too small. The housing problem is basically a transport problem because we can't provide the mobility we need to a great population. So there need to be a 40-year transport blueprint, but not something where we promise to build that because you don't have the money. But there needed to be an elevation of the debate so that at national level it became a big point of contention between the state and federal government that we have to have a national commitment to real infrastructure money, but stable infrastructure money. You can't have the Northwest Rail sector up every year being picked at because the ministers that run health want money for something else. In other words, it can't be, economic infrastructure needs to be isolated from social infrastructure because it needs regular and steady investment away from the budget cycles. And so there needs to be a separate fund set up for public transport and urban transport and also for interurban transport. There needs to be sources of money found. There needs to be a marriage of infrastructure and planning. At the moment they're still separate, despite what Barry O'Farrell's saying. They should be the same. Regional strategies should be, I was going to set up regional infrastructure and planning councils, for not just for Sydney but for Illawarra, Central Coast, Under, whatever, where you start to bring those two things together. There needs to be some discretionary money around so that when you've got infrastructure growth projects, they don't get held up 3 years while the RTA budgets for them. There's some money around that you quickly apply to that. We need to move on election donation reforms much earlier. Clearly eventually did do it, but it took up about a year. I would have done that in the first 2 or 3 months of being Premier. There needed to be some sort of Royal Commission or inquiry into the traffic and parking laws of the state because I think they're a mess, absolute mess. They need to be rationalised, simplified, and you can do that, I think, without sacrificing public safety. I think it can be done. Farrell talked a lot about doing that. They haven't done it. They're faffing around at the margin. They haven't really tackled it square on. Because we're turning a lot of ordinary citizens into people who risk losing their licences, into people that commit all these offences, when in fact they're just ordinary people who are not driving dangerously. There needed to be there's just a range of things. I mean, just the rationalisation of how we provide more housing, totally abolish the current developer levy system, have a flat levy, postage stamp levy approach to everything, abolish stamp duty for all new houses so that you encourage investment in new houses, not for existing houses, although even there it's too much. There just needed to be a whole bunch of things. My focus was going to be on the economic side because I felt that's what drives the size of the cake.
And how much of that was short-term versus long-term?
Well, this was the difficulty, transport to long-term thing, which is the one I sweated the most. I sweated blood on transport because how can I get enough of this done to persuade the community that we know what we're doing when I would have only had 15 months. See, people said to me, why don't you wait 2 or 3 more months and Reece will resign or step down? And I said, firstly, I don't believe you, and B, it's too late. I said, I don't want to be Premier just for the sake of being Premier. I'm not interested. And it turned out, I was never sure I'd get there, and I didn't get there, and with the benefit of hindsight, I've been terrifically pleased I never did. It would have been very difficult. There's just not enough time to do things properly. So.
Let's talk transport. In your book, you talk about having a blueprint for the future. A blueprint that would sort of stand up beyond an electoral cycle or
yes.
between a government of any persuasion. And that's of absolute immediate relevance now. We had Les Willinger resign from Infrastructure New South Wales on Friday, supposedly because of a difference of opinion on plans.
Mm.
You've got the Department of Transport on one side, you've got Infrastructure New South Wales on the other, you've got any number of property groups that have their own views. Are we ever going to get to that blueprint where the community really buys into it with some consensus? What do you feel on that?
I think what happens at state and federal level is governments tend to do their best work when you get an inspired leader and an inspired treasurer that are both in the same cabinet. When that tends to happen, when you've got a really strong leader and a strong treasurer and they're a good team and they're quite inspired and they're visionary, it tends to happen. So you could argue the Hawke-Keating combination was very, very good. Some might say the Howard-Costello combination was very good, although they weren't really into visionary projects, but, Ran, well, he was probably more of a one-man band in a sense, but, In fact, Egan was very good with car. When Egan was there, they were quite good, although Egan was quite conservative as far as visionary projects went. He wasn't into them at all. He was quite fiscally very conservative. I forgot the gist.
So, I mean, you're saying the consensus building must come from within Cabinet as such?
Well, I'm saying, once you get that combination, you're halfway there. The difficulty is, this is my view. My view is there ought to be a 40-year blueprint that lays out where all the road and rail and other corridors have to be, and they should progressively be reserved, and you should start acquiring the land. But you don't promise. But you don't promise you're going to build it until you've got the money, because that's when you lose credibility. When you promise you're going to build something and then you just don't do it. But the issue for me was that you have the blueprint. You get a lot of community support for that. You legislate the blueprint. You even get the feds to buy in and agree with it, even if they don't put money up initially. And then what happens is, if Liberal government's in, they might favour the North Shore lines, or they might favour certain types of lines, or they might favour a different form of privatisation or whatever. But the idea being that in 40 years' time we end up with the same system. We might do it in a different order depending on who's in government, but the skeleton of the system should be independent of which party is running the state.
I guess the question is, who's going to design that, really, in the end?
Well, the way to do it is you actually come up with a system and you try. And I even had thought of, whether I could pull it off at the time I had, I even had the thought of having a plebiscite of the people of Greater Sydney.
To vote on a plan.
To vote on a plan, and then legislate the damn thing, and then have milestones in the legislation saying that in every 5 years you've got to build, X kilometres of new line or new whatever, But it did need fiscal reform at state and federal level because of vertical fiscal imbalance. But if you had a blueprint that you could basically turn to something of a paradigm, if you can, a hard call, but you've got to get there. Then, if one mob's in government and they favour these lines first, or this part of the system before that part, well, that's probably not a big problem, because eventually we'll get there. But what concerns me is that there's this sort of ignorance that comes out of sometimes being in opposition, that you know better, and so you form these prejudices and you're going to do this, and when you get there, of course, you do that and the bureaucracy pulls you a bit away, and then Treasury wait till you're all confused and jumps on you and tries to squash everything, because they're basically, they eat rusty nails for breakfast, and they go to work and they go home at night saying, "What did you do today, darling?" "Oh, I stopped 4 things." "Oh, fabulous." The Darth Vaders of government. Oh. Anyone here from Treasury?
Nobody, so we're free to... I've got a quote in your book about Treasury and transport, which I bring up because I think it's quite illuminating. Treasury has a philosophical objection to major investment in public transport, mostly because it's not a user-pays model. One senior Treasury official told me late in 2010 that the government should not build a fast rail service from Sydney to the Central Coast, because that would mean that people could live on the Central Coast and commute to Sydney for work. He went on to assert that if there was no efficient public transport system, employers would have to relocate from Sydney to the Central Coast to attract lower labour costs, and this would be a far better thing. I was gobsmacked by this analysis. I'd never heard so much nonsense.
And he was a very senior Treasury official. I mean, I didn't name 2 or 3 public servants in the book. I didn't really want to be attacking public servants. So at the end of the day, I thought Cabinet was the one that should have jumped on these people. But I can't understand that logic. Let's not build rapid connections between areas. I mean, surely, even if you're an employer, you might be more likely to create work in the Central Coast if you know you can get to your head office in the CBD in half an hour or whatever. Imagine you go to Parramatta in 12 minutes, I mean, it'll make all the difference. It's rapid links, it'll make all... I'm not saying you don't need more road investment, but we're desperately short of fast, efficient public transport investment. And that's the crying shame, to think that, I left public office, I left politics with this sort of, real disappointment that I never could get my hands on. I was offered transport, by the way, in May 2010 by Keneally. And I said, "Well, Christine, I don't agree with your public transport plan." And she went, "Oh, don't you?" I said, "Well, look, I'll do the job if you really want me to, but I prefer to stay in environment." And she thought about it, and then on the way home she rang me and said, "I found another solution if you want to stay in environment," and thanks. Happy to. I just didn't have the time. In May, what am I going to do between May and December? We're on the nose, everyone was attacking us. There's likely to be a train stopping on the Harbour Bridge, everyone's screaming at me. I've already been sacrificed in planning and yelled at for things I didn't do wrong. Well, what do I want to got more of that for? You know? I was happy to be being Minister for the Environment and hugging koalas. I actually discovered a frog, a motorbike frog. It makes noise like a motorbike. I discovered a motorbike frog. I birthed an elephant everyone thought was going to die. You know, I mean, not many environment ministers can do that, I'll tell you. Remember Party Hunt, the elephant? Drivers, you don't remember all that? Oh, it was a long labour. I felt every minute of it.
But focusing on Treasury, do you feel that the impediments in transport, some from Treasury, do you feel that was more a professional roadblock rather than a silo roadblock? Was it Treasury or economics speaking, or a certain
it was actually
ideology?
It was a bit of both. As I said in the book, a bit of it is that Treasury know that when you create public transport around the way we operate it, you end up creating another source of subsidy deficit. So there's more cost to Treasury. So part of it is vertical fiscal, both the fiscal position, vertical fiscal imbalance, and government not having a lot of money. So Treasury, in a sense, can be justified to an extent by saying, well, look, you can't afford it, you know. But the reality is, if we don't do it, we are doomed.
Yeah.
We are absolutely doomed in this city. You know, I mean, I moved out to Rockdale to represent the electorate. When I moved out there, I could drive into the city at peak hour. This was only 03, in about 25 minutes, maybe 30. You know, Grand Parade through Southern Cross Drive. You know, now, and I take my kid to the National Grammar School, Ultimo. You know, it's 50, 60 minutes driving aggressively and risking those bloody cameras. And what they do is they have this long period of school zone, so long that after a while you sort of drift off and go, I've passed the school zone now. So you go up to bloody 50 k's and bingo. Oh God. So you know what you should do, those people? You should put them in a room with Alan Jones for 4 years. I mean, that's the sort of punishment.
Speaking of ideologues,
we're all ordinary citizens. We're not criminals, you know. RTA, don't kill us all. We're ordinary people. We make mistakes like everybody else, you know.
So most, in the end, it was about balance sheets, fundamentally, that we don't see anything in the red, and so go away for now.
But also they had a view that planning should be done by the private sector. They have a view, and I'll give you a little example.
Hence the ideology.
There was a big ideological component as well, because they didn't really fight hard to try and find solutions. They basically didn't want to do it. They didn't want to do the northwest sector. Then Yema came up, and Richmond came up with the idea of the metro up that way instead, because it went through Ryde and picked up a whole new catchment. And so initially they supported it, then they got experts in to try and kill that as well. So, you know, and that was when they thought they'd get money for electricity. Think about this in Sydney. Think about Chatswood Shopping Centre. Think about Bondi Junction. Think about Hurstville. Now, some of you would be familiar with some of those centres. I regard those as three outstanding examples of really poor land use planning. They're not properly connected. They're not. Why are they? Because they were done by the private sector, with local government being the regulator. You know, a weak regulator with the private sector and no public infrastructure. In my opinion, governments have to be much more involved early when there's going to be a centre, by acquiring land, even resuming where they have to, and trying to change the configuration of the transport links and networks and so on. And then you get the private sector to build it. So if I were building the South West Rail link, and I bet O'Farrell won't do this, I would buy the nearest 50 hectares to Leppington Station. I would buy it voluntarily. If I have to even acquire it, I would put in a structure plan. Then I would resell to the private sector and get them to build it all. Because governments have to... See, the private sector operates on the theory of the firm. They do what's in the interest of the firm. And that's fine. But that doesn't mean it's in the collective interest of everybody. So when, for example, you talk about land use planning, if person X decides to rezone a bit of land to put in some sort of retail outlet, say in Western Sydney in a rural residential lot, if you allow them to do it because that does no harm, because it's not going to generate that much traffic and the road capacity to take it, how are you then going to stop the second person doing it and the third person doing it? So before you know it, you'll attract a new town centre, and then before you know it, there won't be enough road capacity and transport capacity to service them. So the problem is an infrastructure problem. And that's why this philosophy that let the private sector do it is flawed. Where there's a big site like Jackson's Landing and Lendlease take over the whole site and they're going to build all the community infrastructure, that's fine. But in a lot of situations, when you're connecting into a metropolitan network, it doesn't work that way. You've got to provide for the infrastructure costs that will go, the hidden costs that will go, and to do that, government have got to be there early and regulate where it goes. Not because we want to regulate for the sake of regulating, but because what's in the best interest of the individual firm will not necessarily solve the longer term infrastructure and community requirements. And that's the problem. And you know, Treasury don't seem to understand this, and our cabinets have been too weak to really tackle this and say, look, Treasury, you can't just do this. It doesn't mean that within my model, there's plenty of room for the private sector, but you've just got to set the ground rules and put in some upfront infrastructure money to say, look, this is where we're going to build it, this is how we're going to do it, these are the ground rules. And then you withdraw. The private sector can do the rest.
Okay, we spoke a bit about Treasury ideologues.
I'll go off the track.
No,
making earning money from that.
We've spoken about Treasury ideologues and economic ideologues. Have you met any engineering ideologues in your time?
Oh, we talked about the RTA ones.
Yeah.
Well, they're just bad guys. There are, look, there are, I worked for State Rail Authority for a while, there are there as well. You do get monocultures. Monocultures, you know, they develop their own perspective, and whilst they become very good at what they do sometimes can become very irrelevant or out of date or whatever. So one of the good things about the great invisible hand of the market is that it does force change all the time. It forces reevaluation all the time. Not necessarily for the right reasons, but it does. And that of itself is not a bad thing. And so, you know, the bean counters, the social workers in docks, you won't worry about what goes on there. I mean, the planners in planning and their culture, you know, the rail engineers, the road engineers, you get these fiefdoms. Now, in local government it's a bit easier because it's smaller, but even there, the fiefdoms still do their own thing and they become monocultures. And they're not bad people, but they've just got a perspective that misses the other half of the equation. You know what I'm saying? Now, everyone in this room would not be like that, I'm sure. You're all totally like a permeable membrane. You're sort of, things flow in and flow out, you know, quite connected.
Did you work with many engineers in those times at, say, local council, etc.?
Well, the City Council had a city engineering department, and I found that they had their own way, and it was like sort of a hidden language. I've been trying to be like doctors and lawyers, and so in the end I said, well, I don't need an engineering service, I need a city projects division. You know, I need a services division. So I broke it up so that it wasn't, but what ended up happening was you brought in a few architects, and then they just employed architects, so the architects took over it, and they've got the architectural disease. So, you know, every time you think you've got them beaten, you sort of, it's like wrestling with smoke, isn't it? Sort of, you can't win, can you? So, all right, engineers, you can run the world, all right, architects, you can run the world, or planners. Yeah, because they've all got, so, you know, you kind of got to, it's probably why organisations need a bit of reshuffling every now and then, you know, because you've got to focus on the task at hand, not on the culture you've inherited. And, you know,
it was that difficult in policy to try and get broad views of diverse nature at the one table. Was that always a struggle?
It wasn't as hard in local government because we could bring them together much easier because it wasn't so big.
At that level, yeah.
They still went off and did their own thing, but you could bring them together and you'd ask the dumb questions. Well, why are you doing that for? Well, because we've always done it. Well, you know, isn't that stupid or whatever? I mean, you know, you can kind of try and, but at state level, it's very hard. I mean, I'd hate to think what's going on in docks or what's going on buried in the bowels of some of those state government departments. And at federal level, if they start running everything, they'll be even more remote. You know, it's a sad world we live in.
Well, it's a positive night tonight. We were celebrating your career.
No, but these are the challenges. I mean, at the end of the day, it comes in waves. I keep saying, you do get significant steps forward every now and then. Then you get a few sort of shuffles back.
What are the lessons for engineers, do you think, out of your experiences in public life and what you've seen at professional level, projects, big and small? Should engineers be at the policy table more often?
Yes.
What should they learn generally?
Yes, engineers are great innovators, and the productivity gains of this country will come from innovation. They'll come from technological and other innovation. Engineers are innovators. They're problem solvers. They're practical. They're not driven by ideology. And that's I didn't bag the politicians, but they're just as bad. They're probably worse. Ideology is very dangerous. Some of them now don't even have that. They've got nothing much. I've always said about ideology, it should be treated like a lighthouse. Use it to guide you from a distance, but never approach it or you'll hit the rocks. Whether it be religious ideology or political ideology, try and live it, and you're living it. It's a dangerous world. Use it to guide you from a distance, but don't ever try and pretend you're going to be perfect. There's a perfect ideology, because there isn't. So he agrees. This man agrees with everything. I think he's a really inspired engineer. I think engineers have a big role to play. I think that it's a practical world, solving practical problems. It's getting public benefits. It's innovation. It's the things that engineers do well. Where they go wrong is where they become monocultural and they end up in clusters and they push barrows and they want to build bridges because that's what they do. I want to build another bridge, but I don't need a bridge. But I've got one here. Look, beautiful. I think, look, everyone makes a contribution. I mean, I certainly think that my initial engineering training has influenced the way I've got things done. And I think I've been better for it.
On that wisdom, I think I'll open to questions. We've got a good amount of time for questions. Some rules. If you're going to ask a question, wait for the microphone. Just announce your name, your affiliation, so that we know who's who, whether you're from the RTA or otherwise. But we already know them in the audience. Does anyone want to follow?
Can we bring those guys up here?
Oh, well, practically. So there's a hand up. Microphone's coming to you.
So, George Varobia from Roads and Maritime Services.
So not from the RTA.
Does that mean you've changed?
No, certainly. Look, I've got to clarify one thing. We do not collect, we do not put parking meters out, and we do not collect the funds from parking meter fines.
No, you don't.
Local government does.
That's
and
local government.
Sydney Council is fantastic for that. Congratulations for building up.
And I'm
very
responsible
expensive.
for transferring those powers to local government, and I now regret it.
But the question I had was, it was an interesting comment you made about bridge engineers who've got a design in their bottom drawer, and you made a remark that you had a policy in your bottom drawer. So I'm just wondering whether the analogy is the same by engineer, or politicians copy what engineers do well.
Well, it's the engineering coming out of me. I've got policies ready in case I could use it, The difference was I didn't get to use it. I wasn't there long enough, whereas an RTA engineer is there forever, so he'll always get to use it. There's nothing wrong with being prepared. What I'm trying to say is that, and I use the bit of licence, I'm sure you understand, that the RTA are very good at having plans up their sleeve so that when someone comes along they can sell a plan. Not all the plans you've got up your sleeve are bad, by the way. Not at all, but I'm just saying that's what you do. Now, when I was thinking of running for the premiership, I drew up some ideas. I felt that it was immoral of me to want the job because I was perfect or because I should have the job. You're only as good as what you do. You're only as good as your vision. I mean, when you have an argument with someone else in your public life, you should be arguing over vision, not over give me the power. I mean, why should I have the power? Why should anyone have the power? It's what they do with the power that's what you should be measured on. So I just drew up ideas. Nothing wrong with planning, is there? No.
And just to add to that, I mean, I always view from an engineering perspective that a lot of projects in engineering were like campaigns. They could go one way or another. And so you've got to pick your moment where people would support your project, just like a politician would support policy at a particular time, rather than assuming that there's a tick correct solution for every engineering project.
With medical research, you put bids in every year with the NHMRC or with the ARC, Australian Research Council, and some years you may not get it because there's a different suite of proposals come in and you miss out. Next year you will.
The campaigns.
Or you tweak it, or all of a sudden the national priorities have changed and they think, no, we want to fund this. So, look, decision making is not perfect. There's a bit of a randomness about it. There's a bit of luck in it. But luck also comes to those who are prepared as well. So you've got to do both.
Next question. Hand up here.
Frank Peter Egan. You've probably seen a few of my letters in the Herald this year and last year. I was interested in...
You're not related to Michael, are you?
No, but I have a brother, Michael Egan, who always gets that question.
Oh.
I agree with much of what you said this evening, and you did things like bring in regional planning, for instance. But so I grew up in Moree initially, and in the view from the bush was that the state, was too Sydney centric. And I'm just wondering how you developed regional plans, but how did you perceive this, the state as a whole, like as a series of regions, or a city plus hinterland, or a state serving the hinterlands of 4 or 5 in capital cities? How did you perceive it?
Well, look, I think it's a really good question, and I often thought about that because when I was thinking of setting up these regional planning and infrastructure councils, you say, well, what do you do with Western New South Wales, where the population is very sparse? When I introduced the regional plans, land use plans that is, I had to stick to the growth areas. I stuck to the coast. So we had the upper, the north coast, mid-north coast, the Hunter, central coast, Sydney, Illawarra, south coast. Then we had Sydney-Canberra corridor. So in the time I had, I stuck to plans where there would be, regions where there would be growth. Because the big challenges in planning are where there's growth. There isn't such a problem. I mean, you're not going to get overdevelopment or whatever in Moree, sorry, but you're not going to do it. So when someone would have a whinge and moan about, coals going into, Tamworth or something, I'd say, well, good luck to them. I mean, most of those towns welcome investment. Whereas you go to Leichhardt and then they think investment comes from hell, it's carrier pigeon from hell. So it is a problem that there aren't the resources, there isn't the growth in those areas, therefore they don't get the state's priority. There's also less population as well. And the other big problem is the councils are under-resourced, and some of those councils have got half a planner, one planner, so they can't do things. So when you look at how you regulate those things, how you manage them, you kind of got to put your priorities where the demand is.
So you essentially planned a retreat to the coast, essentially was the response?
No. I wasn't planning for us to retreat to the coast.
That is what is happening.
No, I was saying, where's the growth happening? It's in the coast. That's what I need to plan the most because it'll need infrastructure. Whereas there's not going to be much growth in Moree, so I don't need to do much to plan for growth there. Now you might say, well, de facto then you're ignoring us and letting us wither further. Well, that to an extent is true, but what's causing the decline in the country? I come from the country, I come from Yenda. What's caused the decline over many years? Well, resources like water, the general drift, there was an heavily investment in country areas, particularly post-war, and it reached the pinnacle and contracted again. And it sort of reached more of an equilibrium now, but, how much resources should state and federal governments put into country areas? I mean, I think the big challenge in country areas, to be honest, is health services and how you provide them at a reasonable level, with a reasonable level of sophistication and diversity to provide. I mean, my mum was operated for cancer in Griffith Base Hospital, 2 operations, and when the 3rd recurrence of cancer came, they wanted to keep operating, and we just said no, go to Sydney. Now, we were fairly ignorant kids in a country town. I'm convinced this day with her melanoma that if she'd come straight to Sydney the first time, she would have survived. She died in 1968. But why? Because of specialisation. And there's plenty of studies by the National Institute of Health in the USA that show that specialisation has a big impact on survival, particularly in cancer and all sorts of treatments. So when you go to the doctor in Orange and he says to me, well, how many procedures do you do? Oh, I do about 50 or 80 surgical procedures. Well, how many mastectomies do you do? Oh, I do 2. I do whatever. Now, I wouldn't go and have my mastectomy there. You want to go to someone that does 200 a year, or whatever the procedure is. And this is the dilemma. How do you provide the same level of service in country areas that give them the same survival rates as city people? It's a real challenge. Now, even in that area, federal government's faffing around, you know. How are we going to get service out of the country? Build a few regional cancer centres, but still on the coast, mate. It's a really difficult problem. I mean, you're spot on, but you know, I don't have the answers.
I think there's a few hands up. I think that was the first, all the way over there. Keep going right to the end.
James Phillis, Centre for Engineering Leadership and Management. And one of my favourite topics, you talked about engineers and politics there at the very end. And really two questions for you. One, why don't we have enough engineers in politics at the moment? And secondly, what can we do about getting more of them involved?
That's a good question. Well, look, you could fall back on the old stereotype. When I did chemical engineering, the view was that engineers were sort of antisocial sort of beings that like to drink a lot. And as we've found, drinking in politics doesn't work very well together. It's gotten a few people into trouble. But I suspect probably a bit of a mentality. I mean, engineers like certainty, they like to solve problems. And in politics, you just got to be, you've got to be wishy-washy. Well, you've got to sometimes. I'm generally not a patient person, but you've just got to learn patience, and you've got to learn to wait your moment, and you've got to persuade people and wait till the ducks line up, and then you get people on board because everyone's got a different view and everyone's equal. Is it a mindset? Is the sort of when I was first graduating from engineering, I went and applied for a job with Anglo American to go to mines in South Africa or something, where thank God I didn't get it. And they did a test on me called the Rorschach test, where they show you ink blots, ink smudges, and you've got to interpret what you're seeing. And then they interviewed me and they said, oh no, we don't think you should be an engineer in whatever. I said, why is that? Because engineers tend to see animals when they look at these pictures. And you were seeing fat German ladies and all sorts of things. It was called the Rorschach. And I came away so depressed, oh Christ, I've done engineering and I don't see animals.
So did they tell you should have been a politician with that answer?
No, I got into that because I fell into bad company, but that's a different story. So yes, there should be more. There should be a diversity of perspectives in Parliament, and that can only be a good thing, because you get the most dangerous thing in public office is that people that are a bit closed-minded and have a very narrow perspective, and they cause mayhem. I mean, you see it in some countries where you've got theocracies running governments. That's really dangerous. Whenever there's extreme ideologies, whether they be religious or of the left or of the right, the US Congress, we got some mad Tea Party people. Some of you might be Tea Party, I don't know, but anyway. I mean, it's really dangerous. You actually need diversity, and you need arbitrage, and you need contestability, and you need to have the maturity to deal with argument. Now, engineers are bright people, and they're very goal-oriented, and it's a wonder that there are more there. Quite a few have done well, though. I mean, heads of major companies have been engineers. Sam Haddad, who's the Director General of Planning, is a chemical engineer. He's the head of planning.
And I'd just pick up on a point, that point of argument. Engineers and scientists generally don't like argument. Argument is sort of almost beneath them in their mentality. Yeah. To pick up that point before. So they don't like going into that area.
In fact, you're spot on. When I was Minister for Climate Change and Environment, and I hated the name climate change because I wasn't for climate change, but for political reasons they decided to create that name, but before I got the job. But I remember arguing with some of the top climate scientists in Sydney, University of New South Wales and other universities, and saying, why don't you guys come out and deal with all these sort of, because there's a lot of nonsense by the sceptics, Mars has warmed by 2 degrees in the last 10 years, well, you don't trust the temperature readings on Earth, how the frick can you trust the ones done on Mars, I mean, how stupid people are, and they buy this crap, the only issue in climate, in my view, is whether we should be leading the rest of the world when we're not going to have much impact on climate. That's the only sort of issue that has a bit of resonance. But but these scientists say to me, well, no, we're not going to come out. We're not going to argue with these people that are telling lies. But who is? We come out. We're politicians. They see us as biased. Who is? And they didn't want to engage in the public debate. Why? Because, and it's probably also a reason why I'm really happy to be out of politics, because I just love having a clear view of what I think of something without having to worry about getting on Alan Jones and sort of pretending I only half believe it.
Next question. Richard, I think, was the next one. And then we'll go to the back and then to the front. 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
Richard Barnes, Hyder Consulting. I'd just be interested in your opinion on radio broadcasters and their ability to mould public opinion.
Well, first comment I want to make about that very quickly is that I was quite bemused to see the Fairfax journalists recently argue what's going to happen to public interest journalism, and I was saying to myself, well, it's never existed, has it? It has existed, but not in recent times. If you go back and look at a Sydney Morning Herald in the 1920s, you'll see that most of the Herald was filled up with factual information about different things that happened. Now it's all spin, nearly all spin. You can bet that a third of the stories are gravely exaggerated, another third are got significant inaccuracies, maybe a third are accurate. If they're reporting on a massacre in the US, it's probably accurate. Now, radio reporters, it's infotainment. They don't represent the public interest. They represent commercial interests and their own personal agendas. Sometimes that coincides with the public interest. There's nonsense that journalists always represent them. It's just rubbish. It's not true. It's not true. And the community has to wisen up a bit. And I think a lot of them have. I think now when you read the Telegraph, you flick through the headings and you pretty get an idea what's rubbish and what you should believe, not believe, or whatever. It just gives you a bit of a snapshot. Now, with new media, it might all change, but the radio talkbacks, of course, they make a feature of beating people up and showing how tough they are, and I think they're a very negative influence. It's not that the ABC people please me much more, because they seem to be so politically correct and so nice about everything that they're the other extreme. They won't call a spade a spade. Sometimes you need to call a spade, don't you? I think. But I think it's very dangerous. I mean, I think a lot of the stuff that comes out of Angry Radio GGB is wrong. It's factually wrong. And they get emails from a few sources and they peddle that like it's the absolute truth. And it's not true. I mean, then of course you've got tabloid television, Current Affair. I hate them. I turn it off the moment it comes on. There's always some massive discovery and they're ripping you off blind or whatever. And then you had, I mean, here's a good question for you. All the journalists reckon this was in the public interest. Why was it in the public interest to write a full-page, front-page story and then do stuff with Grant Hackett because he blew his lid? I mean, if he goes to court and he gets charged, that should be reported. But why should the guy be made the centre of news? He's no longer an Olympian. He's not representing his country. Now, he might have done the right thing or the wrong thing, but quite frankly, it's none of our business. Why do we buy into people's private lives like that? You know what? That's scaring off engineers from going to politics. They're too smart. That's why they don't go to politics. That's the real answer. Too bloody smart. Because you get trashed. I was going through. I'm trying to sell my house. I'm going through all my boxes to get rid of stuff. I was looking at all these because I kept a batch of nasty press clippings about me when I was complaining, and it was just depressing. I thought, oh Christ, another one. It's not that bad,
Only one box.
Next question at the back.
The others are all good stories.
That's okay, you've got the microphone, go.
Hi, my name is Jessica Q. I'm from SMEC Australia. I was really interested about your 40-year blueprint about the city. I was earlier involved with another firm. We did a lot of investigation work for the metro, so now it's all protected, but no one's going to do anything about it for now. And myself, I've taken a keen interest in underground development like M5Y and stuff like that. What's your thoughts on what I thought is the underutilised underground space of Sydney? In your blueprint, any thoughts, any concept about how we can utilise that? Because that comes back to your private sector development as well. In Singapore, Hong Kong or US, it's often very commonly done. You have a large development on top and it's connected to a subway station directly underneath. And we don't do that very often in Sydney. I'm just wondering why it's not done.
Well, it's lack of leadership, lack of vision, lack of money, federal, state, it's a combination of reasons. I mean, Town Hall and Wynyard Station have been at overcapacity now for, 10 years, 20 years, forever. And I had offered, the City of Sydney bought those buildings opposite, or most of them. I'd offered the state government before I left the Mayoralty that they could have an extra 20 metres underground or more at peppercorn rent, provided they used it for rail expansion to help fix up Town Hall Station. Now, we're putting in light rail, and the light rail route to Lewisham will probably work. I don't think it'll work down George Street, not while you've got all the buses streaming in. I just don't think it's going to work. I remember when we tried to put it up down Castlereagh, I went to see Scully at the time because I was already ripping up the footpaths. And Carl, you've got to start ripping up a new set of footpaths. And the Olympics are coming in 2 years' time. There's no way this can be done in time. And so he pulled the pin on it. And at the time, the retailers were going to scream on the Pitt Street Mall anyway. Sydney, look, light rail is a boutique scheme. It'll work in a few pockets. And bikes will work in a few pockets. And they're good exercise for those who want to use them. But fundamentally, because of Sydney's topography and its history, and because we haven't planned for transport well enough, we do need a mass transit underground system. There's no question about it. And we need to have a route to Maroubra and a route up, we need to have a very fast train through to Penrith, through to Parramatta. We need to set up a radial system out of Parramatta as well. We need to probably make the Illawarra line a metro, because it's a self-contained line. It will probably work quite well. We probably need a route to the northern mid. We need to basically expand the footprint of the rail system, but make it more efficient, probably automatic train control, a whole lot of that sort of stuff. It's only underground mass transit that'll get us off the hook, but that's big money. And it's very depressing to read now that Infrastructure New South Wales. I'll have to take Braun out to dinner and get him thoroughly drunk and put things in his drink, probably. But they're only going to build roads. Now, I'm not suggesting that we don't need to upgrade these roads for the RTA guys that are there, but the truth of the matter is, if we just build roads, all we'll do is rely on more. I mean, it's mathematics, guys. It's not ideology. This is mathematics. On the M5, every RTA can correct me on the numbers, but I think it's probably about 1 million car trips a week, correct, on the M5? About 1 million? About that? Don't you know? See, I don't even know a basic fact. No, you just work it. You just work out roughly. I think it's, what is it? It's 80,000 one way. I mean, let's say it's every 10 days is 1 million, right? Let's say that. You need one of those 1 million trips to run up the back of someone else. But what's that? A 2-hour delay because it's at capacity already. I mean, the fact is,
and the economic cost of that is...
Well, it's huge. Apart from the fact you all got commitments trying to get somewhere. If we don't do something to create it's about an equilibrium where people can make choices to go on the train. Now, I could try and, I do catch the train sometimes, but at certain times of the day, if you're trying to catch the train in the morning, my walk to the nearest station, which is Carlton, is probably a 15-minute walk. It's a fair walk. It doesn't always work for me. Could I park near there? Not with a bit of difficulty. So how do we? But on the other hand, everything reaches an equilibrium. You've only got to see when 5%, is it 5 or 10% of less vehicles during school holidays. It's probably 5 or 10. 5 or 10? The traffic 10. The traffic frees up magnificently. School holidays, it just flows. It shows you that it doesn't take long. So imagine if you improve the rail system significantly and some would shift. Of course I would shift if it was a lot easier. It's a lot easier to go on the bloody train. It comes often, see the trouble with Carlton Station is it only comes every 20, 25 minutes. It was coming every 5, 10, 8 minutes, so I'd be there more often. I'd do the 15-minute walk and catch a train. So the problem I've got is that we have to greatly expand public transport, and that takes a long time and a lot of money, and governments don't want to do it, partly because they're struggling with the money. And I totally understand the money side. I understand that aspect of Treasury's argument. But we need to do something about it. And we can build more roads, but if that's all we do, we're going to make it worse, not better. Because more people become reliant on...
I just think for a city that's so blessed for tunnelling, we're so wasted. We don't do enough.
Mate, you're my friend. You and I will go places. Let's go and see Barry O'Farrell tomorrow morning.
You've got an interview. Last question from the back. Apologies for those who missed out. We're running a little bit over time.
Thank you. Frank, great insight into your... David Hughes from Crown Projects. Great insight into your thinking. Can I just ask 2 questions on vision? It was a speech you made, I think in about 2001, where you spoke about the success, you were a mayor at the time, success of using bookends for public infrastructure, like the bicentenary, we got Darling Harbour and the Olympics. You changed the city, and the government needs to have a vision for the next bookend by about 2015. I don't think we have that bookend. What should the government do? And secondly, at a national level, can we cope for a country of 26 million people with 3 tiers of government?
Well, I don't think, on the tiers of government, I don't think you're going to get rid of one tier. It's certainly not going to get rid of states because they don't bust the services. And you don't really want services centralised in Canberra. They'd be... Look, the feds have got more money, but they'd be more remote. They'd actually be worse. So, the 3 tiers per se would be okay if we managed them better and we had better fiscal relationships. And local government does need massive reform. You can't have 40 councils in Sydney. There should be 10 to 15 for heaven's sake. And all development applications should be done by independent expert panels and give people adequate appeal rights so that they don't feel that they're stuck with some insensitive bureaucrat. Not the bureaucrats are ever insensitive, but it's possible, theoretically possible. In the universe, it's theoretically possible. There's a bureaucrat out there that's insensitive. So reform local government, but reform the financial relations. And that's why with the vision for Sydney, why I said a 40-year blueprint, only because 40-year blueprint's one where the community won't expect you to fund it all. If you make it a 10, 20 year, they'll expect, well, where's the money? Where's the money? But if you make it 40, you say, look, this is a long-term blueprint, and we'll only commit to bits of it every 5 years. But you need to then have the big argument with the federal government. See, I thought the mining tax has been squandered. Firstly, they ended up watering it down. Secondly, they put it into super and other things which have some benefit, but I actually thought, if you were pulling in $7 billion a year, what about if you handed 5% of it to port infrastructure, 20% of it to interurban links like the Pacific Highway, and the balance of it goes into the capital cities in proportion to population. So that, say, Sydney every year got $2 billion for 10 years. But the quid pro quo by the Fed should be you've got to have a 40-year blueprint, and we want to be able to sign off that it's sensible and it's going to work in the long term, and then we'll commit to steady resources. There needs to be that sort of level of thinking. If I was 20 years younger, I'd head for Canberra, but I'm probably a bit too old for that. Well, I'm too cynical now.
Too cynical. Well, if you went back, you might have a breath of fresh air. But,
if a few engineers came with me, will you come with me if I go back?
Can I, before I hand over to John, we're going to stay on stage while they have some closing remarks, but can I thank you personally for your time and the time we've spent together in talking about some of these issues? Can I thank the Honourable Ben Sartor?